Because I was in a Scandinavian country, I was going to take parental leave, right? Mid-90s, parental leave, French company, never heard of. They fired me immediately.
Patrick.
Peter.
Welcome to the Unbrandme podcast.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you here. I remember meeting you the first time when you were in my office sitting down on my sofa, and I kind of randomly asked you, so tell me a bit about your story, Patrick, and the stories really started rolling. The Unbrandme podcast is a podcast where we kind of unpack, remove the layers of the stories of founders, the stories of brand builders, and try to understand how their personal life and their life stories have influenced and impacted the brands that they built, the companies that they've worked with, and the companies that they worked for, and obviously their own leadership journey. When I look back at your story, I mean, it reads properly like a proper hero's journey, and I can't wait to see what's coming next in the next chapter, in the next episode. French and British passport. You've lived in 6 countries, this Malta being your 7th.
Correct, yeah.
You've been wanting to build stuff since you were a kid. Mm-hmm. Your first business, your first adventure was selling cake in the marketplace, and then you moved into the strawberry industry. And that was when you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
It's quite a story, Patrick. I'd love you to tell it to our audiences.
Okay. So my name is Patrick Hulsen. I usually describe myself as a 30 years experienced entrepreneur, 30 years of experience in entrepreneurship. But as you said, I always loved kind of the idea of business, of building things, of trying to sell things. And when you sell things, it's like the proof that what you've done is actually appreciated by others, and therefore there's a monetary transaction, right? So yes, I did start, I must say, at a very early age. How or where I got this inspiration, I don't know. Maybe it was from already building Lego blocks and building, a whole universe with Playmobiles and Lego blocks. And then I decided, that I wanted to make some cakes, sell them at the marketplace. And that's where I got my very first lessons about selling, because I had them. I remember I was walking there in the marketplace, like 8-year-old people were not really taking you seriously. And people were actually not buying my cakes. And I got really frustrated. And then a person said, but I'd like to buy them, but where are the bags to put the cakes in? I didn't have any bags, right? Because I thought they would just buy them and eat them straight away. So she didn't want to eat them. Then somebody else said that they wanted to swap the cakes for something else, another object, which I didn't want. So I said no. And then my mother came to the rescue and she said, you've been here 1 hour, you haven't sold one single cake. So now you've got to go out, show and talk to people. And that was the first, realization that sales doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen. So that was the first thing. The second thing was very funny as well, where I took my little sister on my toy tractor after we had been at a Pick Your Own farm to buy strawberries. And I noticed that the price difference between the Pick Your Own farm and the supermarket was half the price. So we filled up this toy tractor with strawberries. We went around the houses in the neighborhood and just started selling. But the funny thing was the first experience of what can go wrong in entrepreneurship. So we had this tractor, the trailer behind, and we hadn't screwed the trailer correctly. So once we had filled the whole trailer, which was a tiny trailer, right? But the whole trailer with half of our strawberries, we did like 5 meters and all the strawberries were on the street. So again, my mother came to the rescue, took all the strawberries, put them back home, made jam out of them, and we put the next batch, made sure that, we had the screw well on. And this is kind of, very, very early stage ideas about processing, thinking forward, what you need to do to make sure that it's actually a success, right?
So your mom was your first mentor?
My mom was actually my first mentor in business, I can say, despite coming from a family where we have absolutely no entrepreneurs in the family. So I was
going to
like
ask about
the
that.
black sheep of the family in a way. I think it was something, I always had a passion about. It's difficult to explain where and how it came from. But when I was a teenager, for example, I wasn't, looking at football or anything. I was buying all the books I could get on entrepreneurship, on franchising, business concepts. I was even asking people in the US, because at that time, internet was not there. And so to send me the US magazines about franchising in the US.
Wow.
I got 4 dozen ideas, business ideas. And I was so sure that I would just start my company as soon as I was 18. that I had all these plans. And then my father told me, it's better to have a university degree. So if it doesn't work, you can fall back on what you've done. And so I did that.
I want to stop you right there.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a long way to go. And if I don't get this question in there, I've got to wait another hour.
Right.
But so what was the motivation at that point in time? I mean, you're an 8-year-old kid. Obviously, every 8-year-old kid wants to become a millionaire without knowing the concept of what it is to become a millionaire. Was it cash, or was it the thrill? Was it the hunt? What was it about wanting to do something which is completely different? Because most 8-year-old kids still till today, bang a football against the wall or probably play on mom and dad's iPhone.
So it definitely wasn't for the money, and it's never really been for the money in everything that I've done. It's more for the pleasure of building something which is then appreciated by other people as a proof that what you've done has a little impact, is worth something. I guess you want to be, you want to believe that you can do something, and you can do something through the realization that others appreciate what you're doing.
So it's also about being noticed, but it's also about being useful.
Yes, also, but it's also the actual, what do you call it? The process, right? Because another thing I didn't mention to you is that when I was super young as well, 8 or 9 years old, or even younger probably, I had my own little vegetable garden, because I thought, that it was amazing to see how a single seed could become a vegetable. And I was there, at 7 o'clock Sunday morning in my little vegetable garden, which my father had agreed to give me a part of his lawn to do that.
Wow.
So I was doing that. And then actually, gardening is also something which really grew on me, and which I've really related a lot to business as well, because a garden is something which is never finished, right? You can continue putting new plants, you've got to take care of them, you've got to, again, anticipate on the long term what you're going to do, right? So if you put new plants, you've got to think, okay, what kind of colors, what kind of size will they have in 1 year? And so how are you going to trim them? How are you going to take care of them? And it's exactly the same in business, right? How you take care of your partners, your employees, how do you build your strategy, and how do you make sure it's implemented? Because nothing that doesn't get implemented gets done, right? So a lot of people stop either at the idea or stop at talking about it, but you need to take this extra step, which is the hardest actually, but it's the first step to the journey of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, of course, and it's not about the 1% idea, it's about the 99% perspiration.
Exactly.
You clearly were very comfortable getting your hands dirty at a very, very young age. And this, not obsession, but your interest in food is then what inspired you to go to university and study, right?
Yeah, so at the time, I had also all planned it out. Again, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years old. I told my grandma I had figured it out. I would start buying eggs, and I would get chicken. The chicken, I would get goats. The goats, I would do cheese. The cheese, I would buy a cow. At the end, I had a tractor and a farm. But then again, agriculture was probably not the best industry to go in at that time. So then I opted to go in the food industry. But in the food industry, what I realized very soon was that in the 90s, food production, and to a certain extent today as well, was only about volume and longevity of products. And so there was absolutely no health incentives or angles to food. And then it became so far away from my ideal world of, good food, healthy vegetables, produce, and so on. So I continued my studies all the way to the end, because I was really lucky. It was a joint degree. So I was on the University of, the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Technology, and the business school at the University of Newcastle. And that gave me the insight into, okay, but how we do in business, so I had the marketing courses, I had the accounting courses, etc. And that then enabled me, luckily, to move out of the food industry and to get my first job at L'Oréal in cosmetics through the door of finance.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So how old were you when you joined L'Oréal?
So I was 22, moved to Denmark.
You moved to Denmark.
I was supposed to be there for 18 months. And before the end of the 18 months, my direct boss was promoted. So they asked me if I wanted to become the finance controller, which I accepted.
Wow, it's quite a young age to be in such a responsible role.
Yes, but it was really fun. At the time it was really about crushing numbers. We didn't have very good IT solutions. So I was building macros in Excel sheets, automating the accounts for the CEO at the time, which it took him like 4 or 5 days to get the numbers with at the time the IT system, but by optimizing everything, extracting the data, putting the macros in Excel, he always had them 24 hours after the end of the month.
Wow.
So in this way it was...
Which is, quite on the money when you think about those days, because we're talking early 90s. Early 90s, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so L'Oreal, you were working on obviously like the revolution of, the hair revolution, if you wish. This we're talking about 80s, 90s pop music, which is quite interesting when we look at the kind of hairdos of the time.
Yeah.
And so you moved from finance to the Antichrist being marketing, right?
Yeah. So that was quite a challenge, because what happened was that after 2 years of doing finance, it was like the same again, right? A new budget, a bit more turnover, etc. But there was no more challenge in it for me, because I wasn't building anything anymore. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go into the what I saw at the time as the fun part, the creative part. You build your brand, your campaigns. You do adaptation of advertising movies from France, Italy, etc. But then when I said that, the HR department in Paris told me in a very arrogant manner, and I must say I have something against HR departments in my entire career, because they never really understood what I wanted or what I could. Anyway, that's a different chapter. But they told me, Mr. Hulsen, you have to do the difference between what you want and what you can. And what you can is you've proved to us that you're excellent in IT, finance, and so your career is going to be in IT, finance if you want to stay in L'Oreal.
That's it. They put you in a box there and then.
Yeah, that's it. You had a label, and because you were good at that, you could only be good at that. And their theory was you need a different brain to be good at marketing or in finance. And maybe they're right for some people, but I was absolutely convinced that this was not the case for me. So, and then suddenly, circumstances made that I was super lucky. One of the top product managers resigned. And because the CEO really liked me and he saw what I could do in finance and he knew I wanted to go in marketing, she still had 3 weeks of vacation to take. So he had 1 week to do a transition. So he took the risk. He told me, okay, I'm going to tell Paris that you're my only option. We've got 7 days to find somebody else. They are the biggest brands in L'Oreal in Denmark. So don't disappoint me, right? And I took it like, wow, of course, no, I won't disappoint you. And I pushed everything to an extra mile, in terms of creativity, in terms of optimizing the money that I could use for doing the campaigns and so and so. And, at the time, you must think I was like 24 at the time. The turnover I was generating was 7 million euros, and the marketing budget I had to spend was 2 million euros. So I was like, at 24, when I was coming to the big advertising agencies in a small country like that, 2 million euros is a lot of money.
It is a lot of cash.
So suddenly they take you really seriously as a 24-year-old and lay the red carpet nearly, right? So just to make sure you don't go to the other advertising agency. But then what happened, then in 2 years, I managed to get the 2 brands I had, number one, both in terms of sales, in currency and volume. So I really proved, that it was possible to either have a double brain or whatever they called it.
There you go.
But creativity was just, so fun because again, I was building things, and I think this is maybe the key motivator in me, is that it can continue building. So as soon as I come in a situation where it suddenly becomes routine because I've streamlined all the process, everything is running, there's no more challenges, that's where I start getting bored.
Yeah, and optimization is quite a big thing, which we're going to touch and tap into later at the end of the conversation. Okay, so then studio line, marketing, cool, we're done. What do you do next?
So then...
Because this is like now we're talking mid-90s.
Yeah. So then
Internet's coming in properly in a heavy way now.
Yeah. And then, then something funny happened in a way, which was... so I got my son, and I decided that because I was in a Scandinavian country, I was going to take parental leave, right? Mid-90s, parental leave, French company, never heard of. So basically, I told them I was going on parental leave. They fired me immediately. I laughed. I thought, you don't know what Denmark is like. So I did a court case. We went into a court case. 1 year later, I won. Nobody ever expected me to win against L'Oréal, but I was adamant that I was not going to let go. And
of
that
course.
was, and that could be a completely different chapter about how you fight a big legal entity and all the dirty tricks that they put in.
So that's the second big fight that you pulled with L'Oréal, because the first one was moving from finance into marketing.
Yeah,
and the
you
second
can
one
say
was
it in
that.
this way. Yeah. So then I won that, but in the meantime, I decided to start my own company because it was like exploding in me, right? I needed to do it. I had already wanted to do it before going to university, then I went in L'Oréal and I thought, okay, but actually now is the right time. I've had huge marketing budgets. I've had a great turnover. I've got all the financial understanding. So I'm just going to start a company. And so I started a company. I took my parents-in-law's car, went all through Belgium to see suppliers of handmade chocolate and foie gras, then went to France to look some champagne producers and so, and build a brand from nothing, right? The whole brand, the product portfolio, everything, thinking that everything was like mapped out and quite easy. The one thing I had forgotten, of course, is that the difference between a corporate and a startup is that the startup world, nobody knows you, right? So when we used to come in a supermarket with the new Studio Line products, they would say, okay, so we would say, how many pallets of this do you want, right? And then the guy would say 3 or 4 or 5, whatever. Having your new brand in a country where you don't speak the language, and it's your first venture, was a very, very tough
It's a big surprise,
start.
I think.
Yeah. So, but I pushed again, and we built everything from the packaging to the product assortment and so. And we got customers like, we got all the top lawyer companies in Copenhagen. We got the big fours because we were selling really exclusive products. But most of our turnover was done for Christmas presents and so.
Quite a season, really.
Yeah, and like waiting 12 months every time was, again, it wasn't, exciting enough. And in the meantime, one of my suppliers at L'Oréal, he asked me if I wanted to become a partner in his advertising bureau. And that for me was, absolutely, let's do that. And then it was the start of, online marketing, .com eras and so. And then we started doing what we call at the time power sites, which was completely revolutionary at the time, which today is called a landing page, right?
Yeah, for those people who didn't live it like we did. Yeah. In those days, you wanted to build a website. It took months and months and months.
Exactly.
And it was typically done just by your big software houses. So these were not web development companies. They were programmers. That's what we used to call them in those days. Programmers who developed programs to put up what we'd call a big website onto the internet. If you wanted to change a page, it had to go into months and weeks of development.
Exactly.
So the power sites, creating sort of the landing pages, which was there to just create big marketing campaigns, I think had two big advantages. One was the fact that you could come up with something really, really creative. Mm-hmm. And two, you tapped into not the CapEx budget, but you tapped into the advertising budget. Is that right?
That's correct. And it was both an advantage and disadvantage because the advertising budget was controlled by the big advertising companies. So they wanted to squeeze us on the margins, of doing that, because for them it was, they were earning more money by putting a new advert in the print or on TV than by buying a power site through us, right? Because it was still quite costly to do power sites,
of course.
but the impact was really great, right? So we did, for example, a campaign for Master Foods where it was like some of the first viral marketing, you could call it at the time. I don't even think the concept was already there.
That wasn't a thing then.
No, but what we did was we combined the power site with a TV campaign and outdoor campaign where people could go on our site and create a slogan and a banner for Master Foods. And basically every day we would pick a winner and we would send 100 Mars bars to their office. And then we could see suddenly in the database that so many other people were then trying from other companies and so and so. And we got 100,000 people on this campaign, which was in a country of 5 million people, is like amazing results, right? So we then sold that to Master Foods in the UK. at the end of the day, we were with like 7, 8 L'Oréal subsidiaries, which were also working with us in this same kind of power sites and things. And we managed to sell to L'Oréal in the US, which for me at the time was a huge milestone, because, you know, everything in the .com was like US based, US #1, and so on. So being able from a small country like Denmark to sell to an American company, I thought that was, you know,
that was incredible, of course. Yeah. And okay, so that's kind of your story with selling the power sites. But as we both know, that company wasn't as rosy as it was in the early days. So what happened then?
Yeah, so
that's your first proper business then. It's the second proper business, because obviously there was the food importation business.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting business, because we were also focusing a lot on brands for youth, right? So it was more 15 to 25 years old, and so with all the creativity that comes around it. But then we arrived like early 2000s, and we had to, things were changing a bit. It wasn't just front end. We were starting to use like more heavier databases and things like that. So then we merged with an IT company, and in the start it went all really well. But then that was my first like shock in life, in business as an entrepreneur, is how once you start getting success, how some people are so obsessed with money that they would do anything to screw you. And this is actually what happened. So we worked like basically for 6 years. I won't go exactly in the details as to what happened, but at the end of the day, after 6 years, things really started picking up really well. We were earning tons of money. And the other partners just said, you know, now everything's working really well. Actually, we don't need you anymore. And for some reasons, again, because at the time, you know, documentation wasn't with DocuSign and everything. I couldn't prove how much. I could prove how many shares I had in the company, but I couldn't prove what was the what do you call it?
The value.
Yeah, well, the value was also very difficult to establish, but what was the process for going forward if one of the partners decided to fall out? And from this day, you know, I've learned that it's always, even if lawyers are always a bit expensive and so, they're still much cheaper to use them beforehand than after, once you've got a problem, because then it starts getting really expensive.
That's the whole prevention is better than cure. And it's much easier to sign on the dotted line when everything is rosy.
Exactly. And that's what I always tell, you know, partners when I see some companies who start, and I say, okay, so what's your agreement with the other partners? We've got like an email saying we're going to do this and this. I tell them, no, put it in writing, you know, make sure you agree, and make sure also that you decide, because this is what happens in life. If you disagree on something, then what is the process? You know, there's nothing wrong in disagreeing, and I think it's like in a marriage. You know, you should, even when you get married, you should even already decide at that time. So what are we going to do the day we don't want to be together again? And if you have this from the start in the contract, then when this day happens, then everything is smooth, right? So anyway, to make a long story short, then what I managed to get out of this horrible deal was that I was the only one that had been working in intensive care units on a very, very small project for one hospital. And in the transaction, I got the right to take the IP of what I had personally done myself, but also to take the chief programmer with me. And that's where I started the next venture, where I went into healthcare.
Okay, wow. So that was obviously, you know, at the back of dealing with adversity, on the back of dealing with this kind of breakup with your business partners at the time, and moving into something which was probably a smaller side of the business at that point in time, which you then built into a very, very successful organization, which you recently exited, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so whilst all this was happening, I mean, you've got, you know, your personal life, where you're obviously, you know, like that's quite a big deal, of course, and your business life happening, and all this, how is that affecting you as a person? What were you going through at the time? And how did... I'd like you to communicate what you were going through, but also the feeling that kept you going. Because most people who typically would hit such a brick wall at that time, I mean, this could be crushing experiences.
Yeah.
So how did you manage to get over that hurdle and keep on fighting? Because resilience is definitely one of your strongest strengths.
So resilience is definitely something that you build over time, right? And when I had this, when I was told that I was no longer to be part of this company, this was actually the fourth event that happened to me in a period of 2 to 4 years. The first one was, I mentioned to you, I lost my son. A year later, my wife decided to divorce. 2 years later, my father died of cancer. And during all that time, I was, struggling with my own little tiny company there. Then I was working with the others there.
So what kept you going, Patrick? I mean, you've just described like 3 hugely significant events.
Yeah.
And obviously anybody who knows you now sees this really happy guy, happy-go-lucky, superhero type of guy. And yet you've been through some really, really tough times, which typically would blow most people out of the waters. How did you manage to keep it all together? You spoke about hope. You spoke about...
Yeah. So basically, the only thing that doesn't allow you to go to suicide is basically, as long as you still have hope, then there's no need for that. But to be perfectly honest, of course, these thoughts come through your mind. And I handle them in a way of saying that whatever problem I would have, I still have this solution, in quotes, right? Which is to give up everything in a way, in a radical way like this. So I thought that if I still have this solution, so let's put it aside and let's work on the other solutions, which are a bit more constructive, right? And then it's just to constantly try to find your own balance. So what I did was, I was like stomached after they told me that I was no longer going to be there, because it was just out of pure greediness, right? There was absolutely no reason to stop working together, but they thought that if they had my 15% shares, then they would be able to get more money at the end, which, by the way, they didn't, because they never exited, and that's another story. But
karma is beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, in some way, yeah. So what I did was, for example, I started martial arts, and I went to karate 3 times a week, 3 hours each time, so like 9 hours a week of just karate, because it was the only kind of activity I could do without thinking of other things. You just have to be just so focused and push yourself so hard physically. And I also, there was a really great experience, because I realized, how much more you can actually push yourself physically than you actually think. If you got the right coach, the right mentor, the right ambitions. So I did that. That was one of the ways of going forward. And then I started this company in healthcare, and what kept me there was that I managed to build a relation with doctors and nurses which was absolutely unique. And we were really working together hand in hand to see how we could together save more patients' lives, because I was in intensive care unit and operation theaters. And this was like a roller coaster of 15 years, but it was an incredible human experience, right?
Absolutely.
We were working together. I strongly believe that in whatever business you are, you have to be very, very close to your end users. And therefore, I was so grateful that hospital directors understood that and actually let me come in the ICUs, come in the operation room. So I've been there more than 5,000 hours in hospitals.
Wow, Patrick.
Seeing everything, seeing every case.
Could you explain to the audiences what the business that you created? So what was the technology that
Right.
you created, and what was the end? What did it do? What purpose did it serve? Because you've told me the story, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Because obviously when we tap into that, again, we're talking about optimization, we're talking about engineering and data, and that seems to be something which has been clear throughout, like these patterns of looking for better data to give you better decisions,
Exactly.
to be able to help people.
Yeah.
Tell us
So
about
when
that.
I arrived, the first time ever in an ICU, the head of the ICU had asked me if we could program some macros in Excel. And I thought, yeah, of course we can do that, but why do you want it? And here we come to actually a topic which today is very, fashionable, the why, but the why is for me the most essential part of anything, whether in business or in life in general.
Yep.
why do you want to do that? And so I asked him, why do you need a macro? And he said, well, just come to the department and you'll see we need to do some different things, etc. But what I realized when I came in the ICU, I just saw piles and piles of documentation of graphs and things like that, which I knew very well were not used, because as soon as they're in a pile and you are with patients in life-threatening situations, so just between life and death, they're only still alive because of the equipment which is holding them alive. So I remember my first reaction there was, wow, why has nobody done any IT here, right? It's so obvious. I thought I had this picture of, the cowboys going west finding the new gold thing. So, and then I decided that I would do it. It very, very quickly turned out to be a very productive kind of brainstorming. And again, here there was so much to build, right? Everything had to be built. And then I realized as well why the big companies were not there. And that was because it's the most complex department in a hospital. You can very easily build software which says, you've got to give 3 pills a day to patient X. But in intensive care unit, it doesn't work at all like that. Is what are we going to give to save the patient's life based on the last data from the lab, the latest data from the monitors, etc., etc. So you're building an IT solution which is only built on exceptions. Mm-hmm. And this for me was like a huge, huge challenge to solve. And I knew that if we really work together with the doctors and the nurses, we would find a solution. And that's, after 15 years, the difference between and after was that when we arrived, the nurses were writing, 5 to 10 variables every hour, every half an hour on the patient. When we left, we could register up to 2,000 variables per patient every second. And that's because we did a patient-centric solution connecting to the lab, to the medicine, to the monitors, to all the equipment, to all the recordings from the doctors and the nurses and so. And so I'm really happy with that. I had a lot of struggles, could mention a few. One of them was with the IT department, who constantly pressurized us to aggregate the data. And I constantly argued not to do it, because now they're really happy with all the AI we have, etc. They can go back 10 years ago and see for whatever patient, whatever drug they had, what was the heart rate 3 seconds before injection X at a percentage of drug W or whatever, And this is the kind of data which is
extremely complex data,
valuable, but such value, right? I'll give you another example of why I was telling them not to aggregate the data. Is because in healthcare you have very few clinical trials on children for ethical reasons, right? And I always found this a bit an absurdity, because that means that you don't want to try on children with the aim of saving more children later. So we can discuss, whether it's ethical or not. But what I did tell them was that regardless of that, you are treating babies and children every single day. So, and all the outcome as to whether they survived or not is also in the database. So you've got, like a reverse kind of clinical trial by saying, what have you done on thousands and thousands of patients, and try to use the data to find trends, and see
patterns.
Exactly. And then once you find these trends, then you can go into a more clinical proven methodology to test the A/B testing and things like that. So,
of course. Yeah. I think, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure that must have been quite an intense couple of minutes there. I really appreciate you sharing this with us. Sure. And it's extremely insightful, because I think you're one of those people who has managed to turn a significant life event into a significant why. Yeah. And that purpose-driven approach to what you were doing. And I can just imagine you having those arguments with those IT departments and simply because you're fueled by that why. And I haven't known you for very long, but you are a very determined person, and you're clearly a very, very resilient person. And I think this natural approach to consistently optimize and consistently improve, and to always know that there's a better way to reach that why, I think is what makes you really interesting as a person. So you built a business over 15 years. You have
Yeah.
stories of people fainting now in the operating theater. You kind of got
Yeah.
yourself to a point where you were so used to this.
Exactly. I
And
became resilient
Yeah.
myself in seeing. But I remember, for example, if you take a short journey back, I always had a problem in the beginning to actually see patients because I have so much empathy that I was kind of sad for them of being there. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know if I should smile or stay serious or what. And in the beginning, it was okay because, in ICUs, you're behind these glass windows. So you feel kind of yourself protected from what is actually
removed
happening.
from the actual situation.
Exactly. But as soon as we had to integrate with the devices and things like that, I had to go in the rooms. So I took it like step by step. I said to doctors, I'm okay to go in a room where the patient is sedated because in my mind, I was imagining, it seems a bit maybe weird to think of this way, but it was more like a museum. I was going to see, I was in a room, I had no eye contact because eye contact is actually the hardest thing. The second hardest is the smell in some cases, but the eye contact was really hard. So I went with only sedated patients, then I got used to it. Then I went into rooms where patients were awake, and then I went in rooms where patients could also talk. So you just say, good morning, I'm just here to check this and that. And then I, got so much used to that I even ended up in some rooms where the patient was actually dead. I remember a situation, it was in the middle of the night. I had to reboot the computers at the time. The IT procedures were completely different from what they are today. So I was sleeping 3 months at the hospital when we were launching our new medicine module, just to make sure that if there was anything, I could intervene within 5 minutes. So then I was called in the middle of the night. I had to reboot the computers. And then there was a room with a sign, do not enter, ask for a nurse. And at the time, my understanding was that, if a patient has a contagious disease or virus, then that's usually why you put the message on the door. So you have to put a special equipment before you can come in the room. So I went to the next room. The doctors were busy with another patient. He told me, yeah, no worries, just go there. The nurse said, but doctor, and she didn't finish his sentence. He said, but he's French. He's done the French Revolution. He can cope with it. And I thought, what is he talking about? And I went in this room, rebooted the computer, actually started putting my password when I realized that the patient next to me was dead. And
wow.
I remember this, I had to kind of use 2 fingers to remember what was my password, I had to concentrate so much. And then you pass another milestone, right? You're in a room where the patient is dead. Then what I did in the in the business and to engage everybody, because every person that I hired had a passion for doing better for other people, right? So that was our reason of being. It's what develop everything you can, optimize processes to save money, to do more features, and so.
Yeah, so you managed to create that culture and nurture that culture by even attracting, in terms of your employer brand, attracting people who are really keen on serving that higher purpose.
So one of our top product managers, she was, for example, a nurse, a super good nurse who had been really frustrated about the lack of quality IT solutions for intensive care units. So when I met her the first time, I always remember that she said, but if I come and work with your company, I will be able to leverage or remove my frustration, not only for me, but for thousands of nurses out there. So for her, it was really a mission of making sure that every single details in the software was always, optimized for the users.
Well done. So Patrick, you built this business over 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Again, dealing with uncomfortable situations in the operating theater was not the only uncomfortable, parts of the business. You faced, the risks along the way, issues with the funding of the company, right? As far as I know,
I think we faced every single possible thing we could face, from employees, suppliers, competitors playing really, really dirty tricks on us, because as we were super specialized in ICU, we were actually better than the GEs, the Philips, all the others at the time, And so what some of these companies were doing was that every time we found a hospital that wanted our solution, but they were in the hospital system, they would tell the hospital that it's okay. They can buy our system, but the cost of integration to their system will be twice the price of our software. So nobody in their right mind can go to the board and say, we found a really good software, but it will cost 3 times the price because twice we need to pay for the integration. So in this way, they were really blocking the market to us, right? So we had to go through the back door, find some partners, try to leverage our way of getting in. And this was a constant battle for 15 years. And then in the end, I decided that I would exit it because I could see that the fastest way forward to sell this technology was to actually partner or be purchased by a much larger organization. And that's how I ended up selling it to the biggest hospital system in Sweden.
Well, congratulations for that. I mean, that must have felt, to somebody standing on this side of the fence, it sounds impressive. It sounds amazing. How did it feel at that moment when you exited? How did it feel when you just realized, okay, I'm done here. This is it. And I know you kept on obviously, working with that company, but surely, building something from, that was the hope. That was the hope that kept you going. That was the hope that kept you going when you set it up. And then when you got there, what happened? How did you feel?
So the exit was not the hope. And I think, we have to really realize as entrepreneur that the end goal is not the only thing you have to look at, because if you do that, it's going to be a really, really hard journey.
When I meant hope, I mean, that was the next step for you when you had to be, when you were basically removed from the other company.
Right. Okay.
So that company kept this perspective was keeping you alive.
So that for me was of course it was like nice, but after 15 years, you've kind of worked with yourself and you realize that, okay, now I've done it because that's also what I wanted to do in the beginning, but it no longer has the value that I had expected it to have in the beginning, right? For me, what was really a relief was that selling it was a way of monetizing 15 years of really, really hard work. But I say 15 years, but it was actually 21 years because the first 6 years where I was in the other company where I lost absolutely everything, right? I was penniless. I had just a room, worked in the evening to pay for the programmer during the day. So that was such a long journey that it was a relief to say, okay, I won't be poor for the rest of my life kind of thing, right? Because time goes by, you get older, the energy you have is not the same, when you're 20 or 50. So that was for me the biggest sigh of relief, because I also did something which I would never recommend anybody to do, is that during these 15 years, I reinvested every single euro I had back into the business, right? So the good thing was that I ended up, selling it with quite a decent proportion of shares because I constantly went, reinvested. But this is a stress level that I wouldn't recommend anybody to do, because it meant that I was, financially, it was impossible for me to quit.
Yeah.
And,
you had no options.
The only
out
other
there.
options I had was, again, as I said, the option of suicide, because that would be the only way out, So that kept me on the right path to make sure that I went all the way to making sure that it was a success.
Wow, that's quite a hell of a story. Patrick, today you stand on the other side of the fence. Today, what you're doing with SuperCharger Ventures, and I'd like you to talk a bit about what SuperCharger Ventures does and also the other investments that you have. And looking at yourself now as standing out on the, on the supporting lines, effectively helping other businesses succeed or helping other founders find their way and also find their why. Yeah. So tell us a bit about the next step in the journey and also what SuperCharger Ventures is doing.
Sure. So when you exit, then suddenly you get a bit more money than you used to have. So I didn't really know how to invest it, where to invest it. And so I just tried different things. I didn't put it on the stock exchange because I thought after 15 years I couldn't face the fact of losing the money if the stock exchange went down. It was a big mistake because in 2019, 2020, I could have made a lot of money. But anyway, that was a decision. I don't regret it. So I invested in different companies. One of them was SuperCharger Ventures. And the reason why I invested in them was that they are an EdTech only solution. And I believe that, education is probably one of the biggest things that you can support to make a better world, right? Everybody can benefit from being more knowledgeable. And so we know very well that all the extremists come from backgrounds with less knowledge, more influential, etc., etc. So for me, education was definitely something I could go into after healthcare. But again, because of my age, I wanted to find a way of actually leveraging my knowledge, because in a startup, if I had to do another startup, then you do use like 80% of your time on administrative tasks or tasks that could actually be done by somebody else. And my reasoning was that, okay, so if I can invest in 5 different companies and then just use 20% of my time in each of them, and these 20% only give them the knowledge that I have to help them succeed faster, then that would be the ideal setup, right? So I entered in different companies as a coach / investor / whatever we call it, but the whole idea was to be able to brainstorm with them as to where they are, where are they going, why do they want to go there, how do they look at their priorities on every single day to make sure that they don't get overloaded with things which actually are not going to generate any value. Sorry. And then SuperCharger came, and then they had done a deal here with in Malta, where the idea was to build a physical accelerator, was to bring 150 of the world's best EdTech companies to Malta on a 12-week accelerator program, with the idea of some of them setting up in Malta afterwards. So.
Amazing. And I can see from just because obviously I've met a number of these ventures, I've met a number of these startups, and there's some really interesting stories there. Education, EdTech, I know you believe really, really strongly that EdTech is sort of just at the very, very beginning of an amazing, journey ahead. Why EdTech? And why do you think that the world needs to completely change the way it educates its students everywhere? And when I talk about students, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about people who want to learn, people who need to learn, but also people who want to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do I believe so much in EdTech, and why do I believe it's something which nobody can afford not to adopt? It's very simple. If you look at the world today, we're really competing with big, blocks, and the geopolitical situation is really changing as we speak. But one thing that doesn't change is the need for talent. And EdTech is an industry. It's worth $500 billion today. People say it's going to be over 1 trillion within 3 to 5 years. I also strongly believe that this is the case. And the reason is very, very simple, actually. There are 3 underlying parameters which are fueling the need for EdTech, and which are unstoppable because they are global and because they are not driven by anybody except by society. So the first one regarding EdTech is the possibility of having EdTech today. If you think about it, today you've got 6 billion, I think, people connected to the internet. So you've got the whole infrastructure which is in place to do education technology. The second element that happened in our history is COVID. COVID was the biggest single catalyst in the adoption of education technology. So now it was a pandemic. It was the first time something of this scale happened in modern history. So nobody actually knew what would be the aftermath of COVID. But the founders, co-founders of SuperCharger Ventures said that, things are changing, and they believed that education technology would stay for good. We saw a little bubble that exploded a bit after COVID, but still the underlying trends are that education technology is still going really, really strong. If you think about it, before COVID, a university like Harvard, for example, were always claiming that they would never, ever do online courses. The best education is done on campus. Having been there both on their courses, both online and offline. I also agree that it's a different experience when you're on campus, but it doesn't mean that the online is not there as well. So then during COVID, they had to close, like, you know, every other universities in the US. And then after COVID, they decided to test, well, let's try the online course. So they did an AI online course just to try, and they got 4.5 million students. And that was like the paradigm shift.
A multiplier in terms of revenue, no?
Exactly. You know, so even at $100, if you wanted to put it at $100, you would still make much more than you would ever do on campus.
Absolutely.
So today we can see that there's a mix, right? So online, offline, as I said, advantages, disadvantages in each, but it's a question of targeting the right population with the, okay, but what do they actually want to get out of each of the courses? Now, the third very, very, and probably the most important aspect fueling this EdTech drive is the speed of innovation. And if you think about it, you know, speed of innovation today is faster than it has ever been in the history of mankind. But the same speed of innovation today is actually slower than it will ever be going forward. And this means that we're just at the bottom, the very bottom of a hockey stick in terms of transforming every single industry, whether it's with AI, VR, etc. There was a very interesting article showing industry per industry how much AI was actually taking, how much percentage of task AI would replace. If you looked at construction industry, it was like 5%. If you look at middle management, it was 30%. If you look at lawyers, it was 60%. If you look at radiologists, it was 90%. So every single industry is affected by that. And if you on top of that add the new eras or generation of robotics, then you would go in construction industry from 5 to 35%. You would go in farming also to 30% with drones picking apples and things like that. You know, so this need for education is incredible. The new latest Harvard reports show that your or my or whoever's knowledge in a specific industry today is only valid for 5 to 10 years. But if you're in tech, your knowledge is only valid for 2 to 5 years, which means that if you look at it from a different perspective, if we wanted the whole population of every country to always be on top of what they need to know, we would need to build 5 to 7 times more universities in the world than we have today. Yeah, and this is physically impossible.
Absolutely. There's no space for that.
And this is where the tech comes in, right? To leverage, optimize, streamline the transfer of knowledge from one group to the other. And as you were saying, is not just about, you know, putting technologies in primary, secondary schools, universities. It's also what we call the future of work. So every single industry need to retrain their own staff in order to make it attractive and viable.
Yeah, and consistently. Yeah, constantly. I mean, time has flown. I can't believe we're close to the end of this podcast, and I have like another 6 chapters of questions I'd like to ask you, but I'm going to try and zero in onto one really important question for me, and that's probably, you know, my personal indulgence over here, and I want to learn from you. Your love for education comes also from the fact of this constant optimization. I've seen you work, and there are very, very few people who I know who work as hard and as well optimized as you do. And I know that that's not just from the optimization perspective, but it also comes from that kind of consistent need to be resilient in the face of adversity. It's true that learning is something that we can do by studying, you know, the virtual books and then by opening up and watching the videos and signing up to MBAs at Harvard if we wanted to. But I do firmly believe that the pattern of your life, the need to be consistently at the top of your game, and the amount of adversity that life has thrown at you has made you this good and this optimized as well. So what do you have to say about people passing through hard times and the importance of keep on going?
Right. So you know, it's one of the things is the kind of mindset that you have to have. You know, it's every time something is hard, you're learning something. So that's turning something which could be negative into something positive. I also believe that, and that's why I never get on with people who complain, because to every problem there's a solution. So instead of using your energy to describe, how the problem is affecting you, how difficult it is. And so it's fine to acknowledge there's a problem, but use 1% of your energy on that and use 99% of your energy on finding the solution. And if you do that systematically for every little problem, you can see you're going to completely transform the way in which you do things, but also the way in which your colleagues and partners also see things. This is actually, by the way, one of the things I really like in Malta is that we know very well that it's a bit of a bumpy road. There's a lot of new things. Building a startup ecosystem is not easy for companies, for governments, etc. But what I really, really like here is that there's always this optimism of saying, how can we do things better? How can we learn from each other? How can we hear each other's perspective? And for me, this is, a way going forward. Now, in terms of building your resilience as well, I think if you have this kind of mindset, then you just have to think of entrepreneurship as a real game, right? For me, it's like a chessboard. All the other pawns are not your enemies. The other pawns are all the variables in the ecosystem in which you're actually working. And if you have this kind of visual picture, then you know that every time another pawn is moving, you've got to try to anticipate what is going to happen. And you've got to think like 3 steps ahead. I know that, professional chess players, they might think even 30 steps ahead. And if you can do that, yeah, why not, But in a startup environment, and that's what makes the difference between a startup and corporate, is that you have to be extremely quick at reacting, but at the same time being calm. Because if you do things in haste, you're only adding to the problem, right? And you might take the wrong decision, and you will take the wrong decision at some point. But the more you can think before acting or think before talking, the better the outcome, I would say, And then it helps you to plan ahead, optimize your planning tools. So get, all the necessary IT tools that you need to have to support you. Build the processes. Never do the same thing twice. If you can delegate. I always had this saying that if you can delegate a task, even on Upwork or other platforms, to somebody who's paid less than you, then do it. Because then you're freeing some of your bandwidth, and then we can discuss about something else, which is generating even more value for the company. Or you hire a junior employer or employee or intern. But if you do that, make sure to deliver the task in a way that the person can do it and do it well. Because if you have to do it again afterwards, then basically you've missed the point again. So that's that. And I think the fact of, in my personal journey, I know that there are a lot of things which I would have done differently. Access to capital and things like that, working, way too hard to try to compensate what the others cannot do. And so, but these are part of the learning process. But one of the things I also learned in terms of what you get out of a hardship is that you've got to constantly think and being creative. And you quickly find out that time is your scarce, the resource you've got less of, right? So you've got to optimize, as I said, how to make sure that you're constantly following the goal that you want to have, that you've set yourself. So it goes without saying, if you haven't set yourself a goal, it becomes even more difficult, not only for you, but for your colleagues, because they don't know in which direction you're running, right? So there are a lot of principles that you have to put in place, and the more of these you have in place, the easier is the journey, and the more fun is the game. And I would still say one more thing about the game, is that a game, you lose some, you win some, right? It shouldn't be that dramatic, and it shouldn't be that dramatic either for founders. And I do believe that in courses of entrepreneurship, for example, it should be very clear that if you fail with your business, it's not the end of the world, right? But we know that, and that's why I'm supporting another company called Founders Taboo. We know that founders today who fail, in quotes, because they have to close their business, are really go through a real trauma, right? Some MRI scans have shown that there's a similarity between a parent losing a child or a founder closing their business. in the first case, usually you're not in control of it. It just comes, it happens, that's life. In the second case, if you lose your business, you can actually anticipate. There are a lot of warning signs which are showing you that you're going in the wrong direction, right? So there's no need, in my opinion, to be as traumatized as a founder, because if you take the right steps, then you can stop in time. And stopping in times means that you might still have cash in the bank, you might still have, a lot of opportunities, new hypotheses you haven't yet tested, but you know that you've used like so many years, pivoted so many times. You can see that your energy levels are really now coming to a low level. So this is the time for you to quit in order to rebound on another project. And I'll just, say just for the stats that every founder always believes that they are the company which is going to succeed. And of course, you need to have this positive mindset. But at the same time, you must be realistic and you must know that the odds are against you, that companies do fail 70 to 90% depending on the industries. And you've got a 1 in 3 chance or 1 in 10 chance of succeeding. So the way in which I think founders should think is that every company they create should be an experience towards the path of getting there to the successful company. And if you think it's pure statistically, then you should create 3 companies before you can even start thinking, now I'm going to succeed. And you should look at the first 3 companies as experience. If you succeed with the first one, congratulations. If you don't, it's no big deal. Move on to the second one and then the third one. That would be like my conclusion to this.
Wow. And I think that's a great place to stop this. Patrick, at Brandwagon, we believe in one very, very simple concept. Better people make better brands, and the better brands make a better world. And you're definitely one of those people who's making this world a much better place.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being so generous with your insight, with your experiences, and with your overall being in today's podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
so
very
much
for
Patrick.
having us here. Thank you.
Thank you.